very good morning or evening, depending where you are, to all of you. We are delighted that you have decided to spend the next 90 minutes with us at the panel discussion on digitalizing inclusivity, breaking biases in HR through artificial intelligence. My name is Marcel, and I'm the president of the Diversity and Inclusion Club at the National University of Singapore MBA program. Before we dive into the subject matter that brings us here today, allow me to express my appreciation to Ms. Desiree Ko, the manager at the Graduate Studies Office at the NUS Business School, for her support. I'd also like to thank the Vice President of the Diversity and Inclusion Club, Ms. Christine Lin, who will be supporting this panel and interacting with you through the chat. So look out for Christine there. Please use the chat function to discuss, network, react, and pose questions. It's truly thanks to your questions that we'll be able to maximize the full potential of this online panel. So let me tell you first a few words about our Diversity and Inclusion panel. This club has evolved from the Women in Business MBA club, recognizing the growing importance of inclusivity at workplaces. Diversity is a well-known driver of creative solutions, innovations, and superior business performance. However, diversity without inclusion is mere tokenism. Creating inclusive workplaces to harness the power of diversity takes knowledge, experience, and open-mindedness. We live in times when diversity and inclusion is taking the center stage. And yet we have witnessed in the media what goes wrong when a certain group is systematically disadvantaged. Our MBA cohort represents the future of leadership, and it's more pertinent than ever to cultivate our leaders to pay adequate attention to inclusivity. All gender, cultural, and ethnic bias is learned, and therefore it can be unlearned. Our D&I club takes as its mission to raise awareness of diversity, cultivate inclusive leadership practices, and not least, create a community at the NUS Business School where everyone feels accepted so they can perform their best. We believe that inclusivity holds the key for the future of businesses embedded in cultural and multicultural environments where everyone can be their authentic self without shame, fear, or social stigma, where the only thing that matters is the love with which we carry out our work. However, as the saying goes, to err is human. Our biases can creep into our decision-making quite without us even realizing. The human brain has the tendency to look for patterns, filter out, and label. This is how we make sense of the complex world around us. However, these generalizations are not always helpful. Certainly, making premature judgment calls, even if quite unknowingly, can skew HR processes in unhelpful ways. Hiring and retaining a narrowly profiled workforce leads to massive opportunity costs and missing out on creativity, innovation, and different perspectives that diversity brings. This is why we have turned to technology for assistance. Ethical AI and D&I behavioral science are currently reshaping the fundamentals of HR practices, paving the way for objective, inclusive, and unbiased talent hiring and retention. All of you will most likely encounter these technologies in your own career paths, either as hiring managers or being hired or reviewed as employees. Understanding the complexities of utilizing AI for inclusive HR practices is also important to reflect on bigger questions surrounding ethics and technology. We are lucky that today we are joined by three world-leading experts who will uncover all the secrets behind this trailblazing technology. Will robots be hiring us? Well, let's find out. We have here with us Mr. Soma, who is the VP for Global Sales at X0PA AI, an artificial intelligence firm headquartered in Singapore, which operates in the talent management space, helping corporations of all sizes significantly improve their organizational health, powered by AI and predictive analysis. Sid is also proudly an NUS MBA alumni. Welcome, Sid. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcel. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me here. I see a lot of known faces and names in the participant list, which is always very refreshing. Can you see my screen, and am I audible?
Yes, we can, Sid. It's all good.
All right, great, great. Well, before I begin to talk about X0PA, let me share a bit more about how we came into being, right? So we ran a global executive search firm by the name Nasdaq Group for over 2.5 decades across 5 different continents, operating across geographies. And that is how we realized that there were so many pain points on both sides of the table for the employer as well as for the job seeker. And we realized that that gap was not being addressed by the companies then, and there was so much room to improve the experiences on either side of the table, which is why we folded the traditional manpower hiring business or executive search business that we had, and we founded XOPA. So at XOPA, which is a SaaS firm, software as a service, what we ensure is the highest level of objectivity in any selection process, talent management process, or even the hiring process. And that is what we are focused on. And as you see, the tagline goes, hiring has been an art. We all know that. But our goal is to make it a science. And that is, of course, using technology, AI, and data science that we have today. With that, let me just move on to the next slide. Well, we are Microsoft partners globally, and it's always fun to work with Microsoft because many of our NUS alums also move into companies that you see here on the screen, and it's great to be working with them on a professional level as well. You know, when you move in from your classroom to the corporate life, it's great to be working with the team there. How does XOPA work? So I said it's a SaaS firm, but we've got foundational algorithms that helps to pre-screen to make sure that there's objectivity at every stage. To top that, we've got a smartly engineered platform with all the digital tools in place. For example, the interviewing piece, the video interviewing or the recorded video interviewing piece, or even the written assessment piece, the audio interviewing piece, all of those different engineering tools, digital tools are already available, integrated onto XOPA. And that creates a seamless experience from start, meaning right from the start of the hiring funnel until you make the hire, right? So that's how that works. If I were to segment, segment the market for XOPA, we address the SME, which is the small and medium-sized enterprises. We've got solutions for them. We also address the enterprises, the larger enterprises, multinational corporations across the globe, and we've got solutions for them as well. Bespoke, tailor-made to suit their needs. And then a big chunk of our market is the academia, where we deal with polytechnics, universities, institutes of higher learning, and we've got solutions for cater to them as well. Now you will notice a pattern here already. Anywhere where you talk about selections, fair selections, or optimized allocations to be done, that is where XOPA comes into play. And that is the core of our AI strengths, to make selection very, very objective, unbiased, remove all the subjectivity, and then allocate in an optimal manner. And that is why you will see a lot of our solutions also targeted towards these core features. So as I mentioned, internal hiring from an enterprise point of view, or job rotations, again, from an enterprise point of view. Top talent identification, succession planning. External hiring or even lateral hiring, graduate hiring, internship matching and internship allocation. Even it could be project allocation, project formations and project allocations, early admissions, scholarship selections, and of course the government. We work very, very closely with the government across all of these use cases, wherever there is a need for manpower and manpower needs, you know, talent identification, etc., etc. That is where XOPA plays a huge part. This was all from the hiring point of view. We also have solutions to perform workforce analytics, which means post-hiring workforce analytics. And these could be even predictive analytics, such as predictive iteration, predictive retention, and all of those kind of solutions, right? So I don't want to go on and on about XOPA, but just to give you a snapshot of what we do, by and large, what are the segments we address and which geographies we market today. As a company, we are headquartered in Singapore. We have offices in UK and India at the moment. So that's how we are placed. Well, I will stop my screen share and probably allow the next panel member here to move forward.
Yes, thank you so much, Sid. That was really, really interesting what XOPA does. Now I'd like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Huang, who is the co-founder and CEO of Pulsifi. Jay co-founded Pulsifi to help organizations truly understand their people through the use of data, predictive analytics, and AI. Today, Pulsifi helps leading organizations like Nestlé and Reckitt Benckiser improve their hiring and talent management. Jay, now over to you.
Hi, morning everyone. Yeah, so my name is Jay, and I thought to introduce a bit about myself before Pulsifi. So I think what you see on screen is what I've done before. I think I started off trained as an engineer, and then I actually worked in the Singapore government for a number of years, helping SMEs to grow their business overseas. I spent some time in venture capital as well, investing in technology startups from all over the world, specifically the US and Europe. I was also a consultant at BCG, advising companies with various new business projects, and a lot of it boiled down to people issues as well. And finally, I was also in online advertising and digital marketing in one of the companies that pioneered using AI in the space. So as you can see, I'm not an HR person at any point, but I've been definitely interacting very closely with HR on both sides of the fence. So I think on the one hand, been a candidate, also been one of the employees being managed, but also I've seen how it is managing teams and hiring people. And I think definitely one big thing I've learned is that no matter how big or small the company is, whether it's young or old, people really are the most challenging thing to conquer, but it's also the most important topic for any organization. And I think especially now, during this COVID period, it's really the people that make the difference to organizations. So for the past couple of years, my co-founder, who was also from CtrlShift, I think we spent a long time thinking about this. And one day we were struck by an interesting inspiration. So in online advertising, I think the whole game really is about predicting what people might want to buy, right? So what we do there is essentially we analyze cookies, for example, your browser cookies, which is what you would do online. From there, we actually look to predict consumer preferences, which is what you might want to see, what you might want to buy, and perhaps even when you want to do it. And what we do then is serve ads to drive purchase decisions at the right time, right? So this was what we spent a couple of years doing. And then one day we thought, hey, why don't we apply this model to HR? Because HR is a similar problem, right? There is a need to understand people. There is a need to understand what people want. And then from there, we can actually make better decisions. And right now, we can argue that maybe it's not done so well, because how many people do you know who look forward to going to work on Mondays, right? Or how many bosses do you know who love their team so much? So there must be something wrong. And I think this problem has been there, I don't know, for 50 years since the HR profession was there. And I think it's something the organizations continue to try and get better at. But one thing that's really been missing recently really is the use of data to drive decisions. And I think it's understandable, because for a long time, technology hasn't been scalable enough for that kind of decision support to happen, right? So now it's come a time where, you know, AI, data, cloud computing, web technology is going digital is so prevalent. I think it's really the time to look at what AI can do for HR. So that became how Pulsifi came about, which is using the same approach. Can we predict what people might be at work? So it's about, again, analyzing data, but this time not cookies, but anything you might know about that person in the context of work, whether it's CV, psychometric assessments, video interviews, or even employee records, right? Performance records, length of stay. Can we establish benchmarks based on employees? For example, do you know who are the top employees, who are people who aren't? What differentiates these people? We can look at also any other data, for example, what people did in school, or how far do they live from the office. And the idea is that you want to use all that data to predict what a person would be like at work. So we call these work outcomes. So it could be things like attitudes and behaviors. It can also be competencies or cognitive abilities, personalities, work interests, things like that. And I think we've taken it a step further to actually use all that to score everybody So for example, Joe on screen, he can be scored 7.3 out of 10 in terms of fit for the role. And maybe this is something we can discuss. Is it a nice thing to be given a number by a robot? Right, but this number has proven useful for various kinds of HR decisions that we can drive. So whether it's hiring selection, whether it's actually dealing about success profiles, or if you know people have some gaps, how do you help people to close those gaps to get better, right? This is basically what we've been doing for the past couple of years, working very closely with these clients in the talent acquisition and talent management use cases. Right. So for example, the kind of roles that we have supported include everything from fresh grads to salespeople who sell insurance, people at the branch, cabin crew, all sorts of very interesting roles. And we serve these clients across 6 countries in Southeast Asia. And we also strategically partner SAP SuccessFactors, because that's actually a core HR system used by many of these companies. And I think we really complement with the analytics that we bring. Yeah, so I think we are looking at spanning talent acquisition to talent management, and that's the reason for that. The reason is actually in the normal HR practice, there is that life cycle because you want to nurture somebody you hire to their fullest potential in the organization. And that is the kind of journey we want to support, because you also learn along the way, right? So for example, by observing how hires have turned out over time, can you improve hiring the next time, right? And can you actually help these people to get better? So when we work with our clients, for example, Nestlé, 97% of the time when they hire on our platform, we predict performance accurately even after 1 year into the role, right? So for many of these organizations, it's not just about saving time or saving effort, but really improving quality, which could be difficult if you just did everything manually. I'm just going to show you a couple of snapshots of our platform so you know, have a better flavor of what we do. So on the left, I want to talk about holistic profiles. So rather than present CVs, which I think the world is very used to, we actually want to focus on the hard skills and soft traits that really matter for the job, right? Because as much as you would love to know what this person did before or where he went to school, maybe it's not so important, right? In terms of how this person is going to perform in that role. On the right side, we provide various gamified psychometric assessments because I think the traditional ones have gotten pretty dry. We also provide dashboards for the employees as a group. So for example, you can look at performance and potential, you can look at attrition risk, and we're able to drill down to each individual, which I think is the real power over here. So for example, if there's somebody at flight risk, can we actually identify why? And can we look to try and intervene, right? Or if this person is a high potential candidate, what can we recommend as targeted learning and development to help this person get even better? So I talked a lot about understanding people. I think this part is really important as well, which is success profiles. We call them success profiles. The idea is, what does it take for people to really do a certain job well, right? So for example, HR manager that you see on screen can be broken down into a whole list of responsibilities and tasks, and each of which require a certain amount of hard skills, soft traits, cognitive abilities, and work experience. So what we're trying to do out of this model is really get people to focus on really the drivers, the ingredients that make people succeed at jobs, rather than focus so much on things like the CV, right? And at this point, if you could really understand what's required for a job and what's required for the person, then you can really do that fit well to say that, you know, how do I fit that model? How do I fit a certain role? Or if the role actually is evolving, how do we help the person evolve? Okay, at this point, I also wanted to show you guys a pretty interesting video of the kind of success profiles we put together, right? So this is just a snapshot of what we have in our database. And I think to date, we have looked at maybe 50,000 of such jobs. What's interesting is that you can actually start to cluster these jobs based on how much the underlying components are similar, right? And out of there, actually, this is where we realize that if people have done something and then this job calls for something similar, we can actually realize that this person could be a good fit, even though they may not describe it the same way. All right, so how do I get out of? Okay, yeah, so that's the end of my intro. So really, the big thing we want to do is to help people achieve their true potential. And when we do that, we believe that we can help organizations do that as well. Because at the end of the day, we believe that it is great people that make great organizations. Right, thanks.
All right, thank you, Jay, for sharing with us how Pulsifi helps to make better HR decisions. And now our third speaker, calling in all the way from the sunny shores of California, is Ms. Shirin Nikain, the founder and CEO of Upful AI, a software writing coach for more meaningful, actionable, and unbiased employee performance reviews. Upful's mission is to make career advancement more equitable and inclusive. So let's find out how AI helps write better performance reviews and bring D&I into talent retention. Shirin, I'm handing it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen. I'm going to start with just a little bit about myself and why I started this company. So Upful is meant to bring equality to career advancement, meaning promotions and salary increases. So a little bit about me. My background is also in electrical engineering, and I just last year finished my executive MBA from UCLA. For the past 12 years, I've been in engineering, data analytics, and in product management. I've worked for 5 startups. This time is my first time actually founding a company. I started my career in aerospace and defense, and then I became the lead engineer for the Beats by Dre headphones. And then I moved on to just pure software product management, where I helped develop a chatbot and fraud detection and prevention APIs that some of these companies on the right have used. And then also I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and I have had an illiterate grandmother. So why I started this company. In my last couple of jobs, I had over 30 meetings with my managers and with HR about bias and discrimination. And I was told that it's all in your head. You can't prove it. So nothing was investigated or resolved. And at least 20 times I had doctor's appointments for things like insomnia, acid reflux, acne, hair loss, weight gain, all from the stress from my job, from knowing that I was being discriminated and my managers and HR not doing anything about it. And that costs companies and people a lot of money. But I didn't give up on trying to resolve the issue. And they called me demanding, stuck in the past, combative, and accusatory. So then I was put on a dead-end job assignment. I received a negative performance review, and I was laid off. And EEOC is a group in the United States that it's the Equal Employment Opportunity organization. 75% of people who reported an issue like discrimination, they also reported facing retaliation, meaning that they were then punished for having reported that issue to their manager or to HR. And I had asked for examples so that I could improve what I was doing. And I was told that she's not open to constructive feedback. So this is the feedback that I got. I got one piece of feedback from my manager with HR in the room. They said that when her colleagues ask her for help, she makes them feel like they're imposing on her. That's what my manager told me. And I thought, well, this is kind of crazy, because he knew that I was working on improving time management and time that I had to focus on really detailed tasks. And so I made a very deliberate switch from, whenever people asked me for help, I would stop exactly what I was doing in that moment and help them. And then the shift was that every time they would ask me for help, I'd say, okay, happy to help. Can you schedule some time on my calendar? And my manager knew I was doing it, but he was using it against me because I had reported bias and discrimination. So I did a little research. I found a study, and the study showed that participants of the study had to evaluate the performance of a male or female employee who did or did not stay late to help colleagues prepare for an important meeting. So in the case where both the man and the woman said, yes, I'll stay late and help, the man was rated 14% higher than the woman. And in the case where the man and the woman said, no, I'm sorry, I can't help, the woman was rated 12% lower than the man. And what they found was that for a man, when he says yes, they see him as a saint. He didn't need to do that. He's a really nice guy. We like him, so we're going to rate him better. When he says no, it's like, oh, okay, he must be busy doing more important things. When the woman says yes, well, it was expected. She's supposed to be humble and helpful and just kind of like helping everyone around her. But when she says no, they think that she's selfish. And I shared this study with my manager and with HR, and they ignored it. And so this is why I started the company. Basically, I thought that wouldn't it be nice if there was some kind of piece of software that could tell managers when their feedback is biased, because then maybe they'll actually listen to it, and maybe I won't get punished for having brought it up. So that's why I started this company. And I think you all know that there's already there's a lack of diversity in management and leadership roles. So at the entry level, you do see a lot of women and minorities. You see more than 50% of them. But when you get into C-suite, it's a lot less. And there's an issue not just with hiring, which one of our other panelists said is his company is focused on solving, but there's also an issue with advancement and how do people get promoted into these roles, and are they getting promoted at the same rates as other people? So that's why we're focused on performance management as well as part of the exit, because as I said before, retaliation is a huge issue in the workforce. So bias leads to ineffective and misleading performance reviews, and it also costs companies a lot of money. In the US, it's about $500 billion a year from bias. And that's a combination of these different factors. So our solution, we're using natural language processing, which is a form of artificial intelligence and behavioral science. And what we do is we analyze the performance review language as it's being typed in real time. So we're looking for vague, subjective, assumptive, and potentially biased language. And then we privately coach the person as they're typing, sort of like a Grammarly, if you've ever heard of it in the US. It helps people write in English. So we do the coaching, and the whole point is so that the performance reviews are more meaningful, actionable, but also unbiased. And I can get off of let me get out of this presentation real quick and show you our live demo. So we haven't launched yet, but this is kind of how it would work. So if I said, you know, she did a great job. Sorry, hold on. Maybe I shouldn't do a live demo. Okay, I'm not gonna do the live demo because it's not working right now. So here's an old demo. You can see that as somebody types, these bubbles show up on the right side with coaching feedback. In this example, we're looking at the word aggressive, and we ask questions to provoke deeper thinking. We ask them if certain things are related to performance or if they're using very extreme language. In the case of aggressive, we offer two alternatives like assertive or confident, because this is one of the things that it could be potentially biased based on gender. So here was the static version that you can see asking for a specific example. And even when it's positive, we still ask for a specific example, and we tell the person that they might do it more often if you give them more specificity. So why do we care so much about language? Sometimes we use different words to describe the same behavior, but because maybe we like somebody better, we use better language. And so there's that kind of bias. But even if we use the same exact word, there can be bias that impacts how that word is interpreted. So for example, the word powerful, 95% of the time when it's used to describe a woman, it has a negative connotation. And 70% of the time when it's used to describe a man, it has a positive connotation. So you can see how this kind of research can have a huge impact on how performance evaluations impact people's ability to grow in their career. And on top of that, and this simulation wasn't even based on gender. It was just based on a tiny 5% difference in performance ratings. That 5% difference, it creates a 2-level gap in the period of 7 years. So not only is that affecting their representation in management, but it's also affecting their cumulative earnings over that time. So we know that we know a lot about traditional diversity and inclusion training, and when you look at over 30 years of studies on that type of training, it hasn't shown to be very effective, and it's not enough on its own. So we believe that we can help with that training, because instead of it being, you know, once every couple of years or once every year, it happens every time somebody has to give feedback. And because it's right in that moment, they're less likely to forget what they learned. And again, because it's coming from software and we're doing it in a really non-accusatory way, we think that you know, it's less judgmental, and people who are receiving that feedback will have a less defensive reaction and be more open to thinking more deeply about their language and what they're saying. Also, it's private and customized, so it's a safer space for people to learn. So I just wanted to leave us with just one more example of how delicate language can be. I think this one is powerful. In this example, we say Tom is hesitant in making decisions, but he's able to work out multiple alternatives and come up with a solution. And then in the second example, we have a woman, Amanda. She seems paralyzed and confused when facing tight deadlines to make decisions. Now, imagine that these two were the same exact behaviors, but in one case, the man was hesitant, but the woman was paralyzed and confused. There's a couple of different problems with this. One is that with paralyzed and confused, how do you know that that's what's going on in her head? And the same with Tom. How do you know he's just hesitant and he's not paralyzed and confused? And what this kind of language is exactly what kind of affects somebody's ability to get promoted. Tom seems more more intelligent based on this review, and so Tom is more likely to get the promotion. And that's how a big impact language can be in performance assessments. And that's it. It's my pleasure to speak on this panel.
Thank you, Sher. That was really, really insightful. I'm sure that we have learned a lot about how to be more inclusive in our performance reviews. So now I'd like to just ask a few questions. So my first question will go to Shirin. And, you know, looking at all of this, well, maybe how to change the minds of those HR managers who are probably skeptical about this technology and maybe dislike the fact that now a robot is telling them how to write reviews, how to analyze people, and how to make decisions. How do they go about actually convincing them that this is truly beneficial?
Yeah, I think the key for HR people is for them to understand how the product is working and what is the role of AI, and how did we decide what we're coaching on, for example. And for other people, it might be like, what data set did they use to train their AI models? And I think it also helps if we're not making hard decisions for them, or if we're not kind of making black and white decisions, but we're more of an aid or something that kind of augments either what they're doing or what employees are doing. So like in our case, we're coaching the employees as they're writing, but they're merely like suggestion, tips, best practices. We're not making any decision as like, oh, you are wrong, you are right, or this is bad, this is good. We're just making the suggestions, and it's very soft language. So it's less likely to cause a lot of disagreements with HR about how that's done. And then also on the flip side, because what we can do is monitor all of the reviews for HR, we can flag things for them to look at if they need to. Again, it's just like, you know, we're just flagging things that they would need to maybe investigate, but it doesn't mark it as like, this is bad, this is wrong, this is biased. We're bringing things to their attention in a more efficient way. And so part of it isn't necessarily the AI, it's just what software does is make things more efficient. It's an aid and it augments their work. And so that's kind of what I've found in my discussions with HR, that they're more open to these solutions when it's not like a black and white solution, it's more of an aid. And the gray area is still visible to them, and there's transparency in how our product works.
Hi, Marcel, if I can jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, one thing that some companies do also, in the case of, let's say, a selection use case, right? They would actually want to do with AI and like without AI in parallel, and then see what the outcomes look like, right? And for example, in our case, sometimes you find that, oh, the overlap is actually 90%. Then it gives the HR people some comfort that, okay, somehow or other, you know, this model has been able to capture a lot of what the human is trying to do that's very complex and inexplicable. So that gives them more confidence to go further, to make use of that AI, maybe train it further into something that actually they feel comfortable to use. Yeah, but definitely there are some people who are, there's like a mental block. They just don't want to try. Then yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Yes, absolutely. That's very good insights. Thank you. My next question would be to Sid. You know, Sid, you talked about cultural fit, but how can artificial intelligence understand the corporate culture in order to hire and retain people who are a good fit? How do you learn? How do you teach the machine what is a cultural fit and what isn't?
Yeah, there is no one size fits all, right? When it comes to cultural, every company has their own value system, their own ethos, their own kind of what they call a cultural fit. So it's a very, very customized solution or an algorithm that we build with that particular company. First of all, to understand what they mean by culture, what they mean by a cultural fit. And it needs a lot of data to be able to past hiring data, current data, employee data, etc., to be able to train the model to understand that particular company's fitment. So it is not a off the shelf kind of an offering to see, hey, this fits your culture. You know, it takes a lot of work, especially from the data science side of things.
Yes, thank you. My next one would be directed to Jay. So Jay, in your work, did you see any common traits among companies that integrate AI in their HR practices? I mean, is there any particular industry or location or company profile that dominates in the use of AI in HR?
I would say the companies that tend to use more digital and technology in their core business, right, tend to be the ones that are also more progressive in using technology for HR. So example are, you know, consumer goods companies. I think they invest a lot in technology for even things like marketing and supply chain management and all that. So for them to apply to HR seems quite natural. So similarly for telcos, financial services, a lot of these are high touch consumer businesses. They definitely do that. So the flip side, we find industrial goods companies, some logistics companies. I think for them a bit less so, right? And but actually the biggest difference actually will come in terms of the, I guess, the geography of the I guess where the company is headquartered. And I think generally we find more Western companies using it than companies based out of Asia. And I think that also reflects a kind of difference in HR mindset as well. Yeah. Which also explains why, for example, D&I is a much bigger topic in the Western markets than in Asia.
Yes, and that's a great point about the culture. So actually, I wanted to tie it back to Shirin's presentation, and you know, there was a question in the chat from Josephine that some terms are actually culturally oriented, and use of vast majority of HR language could be itself culturally loaded. So how does AI intervene in this? You know, and has it been used in local companies? How does it negotiate local cultures and local nuances when it comes to language?
So from what we're working on is only for the English language and localized to US cultures. And there's a topic in linguistics. So linguistics is the study of language, but there's something called sociolinguistics that looks at how different languages and different cultures impact how we perceive certain words. And so you would need to bring in that expertise to localize and change the way that language is understood and how we do the coaching. So right now it's only for the US and for the English language. If we wanted to adjust that for a different location, we'd have to probably talk to and consult with sociolinguists who are experts in kind of that field.
Sorry, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Sid, my next question is to you. You know, sometimes hiring managers and HR professionals, they rely on intuition and they claim that they somehow know the talent when they see it. So how does AI emulate this intuition? That's gotta be hard to teach a machine to kind of replicate or emulate this kind of intuition that we don't really know what it is, but we just feel it. Like, so how does the software deal with that?
Yeah, Marcel, thank you so much for that question. And I'm not a I've never been from the hiring space, just like Jay mentioned. But we all know, or we at least understand, that these intuitions or these feelings or this, is filled with biases, right? What you feel may not be what I feel, and this is subjectivity that we are talking about. So the idea behind having technology be able to do this, or make at least augment the decision making capability, is to remove these biases, or not to emulate what I would do or what Shirin or Jay or would do, in a specific hiring setup. So AI, I believe, is able to augment that capability to overcome the biases which are conscious and unconscious, and that is where I think the impetus lies. Hiring managers should see it not as a tool that replaces their decision making, but a tool that enhances their capability to make better decisions, which is rid of biases, rid of subjectivity, and all of that. So to answer your question in one line, it's not to emulate their feelings, but to overcome that bias that might be unconscious or conscious.
Hey, Marcel, can I add on?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the kind of approach we like to take is this concept of the success profile, which I spoke about, which is what we do is essentially use job market research, organizational psychology, as well as analysis of actual employees in that job to actually figure out what are the traits that really show that is important to be, the traits that are really important that drive success in that role, right? Whereby, for example, the people that tend to perform a lot better, right, regardless of all the other factors like gender and all that, certain traits actually tend to make people do better in that job. And actually, if clients want to, there's also a way to have conversations about whether these lists of traits make sense, right? Because you find that sometimes the overlap is great. That means, okay, the data says something, supports how decisions are made. But there are also times whereby the data is completely different from how decisions were made, which is the HR people will say, oh, really? You mean we ended up selecting for these things? So I think the answer is really using data to have those conversations. And along the way, then you also get buy-in because people then start to realize, actually, this gut feel that we have, not that it's right or it's wrong, but actually it can be explained in data. And I think that's the more important part.
Yes, thank you. That's quite insightful as well. Maybe my next question goes to you, Jay, as well. So, previously when CVs were scanned for keywords and things like that, many career advisory services popped up claiming that they kind of figured out the magic combination of words to sort of hack the system. And given that AI is also based on patterns, is it actually possible to sort of hack the bots to produce favorable outcomes? Is this actually something that can be tricked to get you the upper hand or get you some kind of favorable position when you're applying for a job?
Okay, so the answer is actually yes and no. So technology aside, if a candidate were to write a CV that basically is based on the job description, right? He's definitely going to get a high score for it because everything that the job asks for he can do in the CV, he'll definitely do well in that regard. So even if the old world where they're using keyword matching, this is going to work, right? Now, the thing is, I think increasingly employers are starting to realize the CV isn't the only piece of data they would use, right? So, for example, they will run competency tests, psychometric assessments, reasoning tests, interviews, things like that. So the person's got to ace everything. So it's not so easy to trying to fake it, right? So like you can write what you want in the CV, but if it turns out they can't really do it, then that's not good for you. But on the flip side, I think a lot of systems are also moving away from keywords to use things like natural language processing. So, for example, even if I said something like, I'm looking for account manager, but the person has done client support, but actually we know it's a very similar kind of concept. So this person is going to score well, even if they didn't try to game it, right? So I think that's the upside, which is with technology, we can actually encourage people to be more authentic, to be who they really are, because ultimately you want people to be selected for who they are than trying to, be something that they're not.
Yes, that's quite true. There's been some concerns, and you mentioned that CV is the only piece of information that the company has on the candidate. How about social media? Is it ever going to be a part of the process, part of the screening, and maybe kind of infringing on our privacy to kind of understand us better as candidates? Is that actually something that's happening, or is it just an ungrounded worry?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. So in terms of technology, it's actually possible for sure, right? And you find that in some markets like China, for example, that is actually pretty common. In some markets like Europe, because of GDPR, it's severely frowned upon, right? So actually, the choice depends on the employer whether they want to use it or not. But in terms of technology and the science behind it, there is some research that shows how people express themselves. Let's say in a lengthy post on social media, it does describe something about their personality, right? And if you take, again, it can also factor into things like gender and cultural differences, but there are signals that can be picked out. And so the danger there is, would you want to take those signals in the right way or the wrong way? So for example, will you want to understand the personality behind that person, or will you be very distracted by the fact that the person is drinking every other day, right? So I think there's a lot of thresholds that need to be set if they really want to use it well. But if you ask me, yes, I think there's a huge pool of data that could be relevant, but it's tricky to get it right.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure that's quite reassuring to some of us, at least that there's some protections of privacy in place. And now I would like to ask Shirin, this question has been coming up a lot, and it's a common concern that AI, it's trained on historical data, and it can actually inherit both the conscious and unconscious biases of past hiring managers. We all heard about the case of Amazon screwing it up really with this AI technology, that it turned out that the technology was biased. So how do you clean the data? How are you from such biases? How do you deal with that issue?
Yeah, so for our use case, which is not the hiring data where they looked at, past hires and what was their profile and then amplified that bias, the way that we do it is slightly different. We're looking at past historical performance reviews, and we're looking at how language correlates by groups that are, who's writing it and who's receiving it. And then also what were the business decisions that were made that were tied to that, like promotion, salary increases, involuntary turnover, and voluntary turnover. So looking and correlating those things and then coming up with what do we coach around, so that there's some kind of statistical reason that for coaching around that thing, around those terms. But it's also that we're not looking at what was the language and then, oh, it should be like that. So we know that it's not clean. We know that it's not good data. That is not your golden data set that you should train your models around. So what we're looking for are those differences based on identities, and hopefully some of those differences that could be legitimate, pointing to legitimate discrepancies in how people are perceived because of their identity, be it gender, race, sexual orientation, something else, maybe disability. Even age. We have a lot of ageism in the tech industry in the US at least. So what we're looking for are those differences. And we know that that doesn't mean that there's an actual bias. It just means that maybe it's something interesting that we should try coaching around. So the algorithms are always going to be changing based on how people respond to the coaching that pops up on the right. And we do have a feedback loop created so that we could learn from how people responded to it. Did they make a change that was related to it? Did they click on was it helpful or not helpful? Different things like that. But none of it for us is going to be fully automated because it's such a sensitive topic when you're talking about potential bias. And that's also why I call it potential, because it's not, like I said, it's not black or white. You can't prove that it is bias or discrimination. All you can do is try to coach around it, see if helping somebody think more deeply about it, asking them to provide a specific example, does that then help them think more deeply about it and then back it up with some kind of, you know, specific example? Or do they reconsider what they're saying and how they're saying it over time? And so that's why it's a very soft thing, and we're not looking at what we consider good data and then trying to recreate it. We know that the data is bad, and that's why we're looking for those differences. But that's just our use case.
I just want to add on to what Shireen just mentioned. From a hiring point of view, it's very important to have data and then stress test that data. Run your algorithms, test your algorithms to make sure that they are ethical. And that's where the whole different topic of ethical AI comes in. Totally different ballgame altogether. But to make sure that your algorithms are not taking into consideration those kind of factors which can be discriminatory in nature. So stress testing those algorithms, stress testing the data is very important before you roll out and go live.
Yeah. Actually, I got to agree on that. I think the human plays a really strong role in shaping the algorithm. So like for us, we call it a co-AI model, right? Whereby the human plays an equally important role to guide the AI. And I think we also believe this diversity extends beyond just gender and background, but also into personality, work interest, work values, which we want people to be diverse across as many things as possible. Although I think generally the community tends to focus on a lot of more superficial elements, but really it's to go all the way, which I think is a really important one. So as much as you have certain success related traits, I think you want everything else to be diverse. But actually the tricky thing also is, maybe this is a question for the panel, right? A question for you guys, which is, so this diversity thing also goes both ways, because we've also seen, for example, how some organizations would want to specifically include a certain, let's say, ethnic majority, or include a certain ethnic minority in order to hit that kind of mix, even at the expense of reducing thresholds for selection, right? And sometimes I feel it's a very odd kind of a decision to make, right? Because then the D&I becomes an objective on its own, right? Rather than actually trying to be a guiding principle. So I think it's really difficult to implement, right? Because yes, you know, I think on the one hand, the organization needs a performance, but optically there are also certain objectives they need to achieve. So for me, I think that is one of the tricky things. And as much as algorithms can come in to make recommendations, the humans override if they want to. And I think that matters a lot more.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe my last question before we move into the Q&A, and I already see a lot of questions in the chat. I want to leave a lot of time for that. What is the future with all of this? Are really robots going to be hiring us? And should HR managers be worried that machines will be replacing them? I guess the answer is probably not, but where do you see this going? You know, how prevalent, how dominant is it going to be? How disruptive is it going to get? And where do you see this technology going next?
Shall I go first?
Go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So imagine this. My job day in and day out.
My safe entry is taking forever to load.
They come in first.
Okay.
Will you be dining in with us?
Yeah.
Douglas, just I'll mute you. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, no worries.
Imagine this. My job day in and day out is to speak to HR leaders, talent acquisition heads across the globe to enhance, to influence them to use technology, right? And they know somewhere down the line, this is improving efficiencies, which means lesser headcounts. It's a tough job. It's a tough job to convince them that, but the idea is not to see a world where robots would take over the jobs and do the hiring themselves end to end. There is always going to be a human component when we talk about hiring. Whenever it comes to people, you know, including not just hiring, but wherever you have touch points where people are engaging with each other, there would never be 100% replacement with a robot. The only advantage of using technology is to augment the entire experience for both sides, and that you are able to focus on quality, you're able to focus your time on quality candidates or spend your time in more efficient manner so that you improve the overall efficiency of the company and your own outputs. I think that's where it should get. It is on the right track at the moment. Of course, there's a lot of education that's required along the way because people perceive AI in different in different ways, right? That is why there is a fear that it would take over their jobs. But I'm sure that this would communicate itself in the right manner as we move along, and there would be a fine balance between the use of technology and the use of manpower where it's required.
So my view is that it's actually gonna be very pervasive, and some people might not even realize it. It's like, for example, in the past, there are definitely people who value face-to-face meetings over video calls, but because of this pandemic, everybody's on Zoom, and now you realize that, hey, Zoom works just as well. I'm not going back. Same thing for digital tools for hiring, all that kind of stuff. Hey, it works, right? I'm not going back. So I think that's just how it is. Even like on smartphones, there's so much AI that goes inside, and we just accept it, right? So sometimes it's just our mind trying to play tricks on ourselves.
I will also add that, you know, there's a lot of different company sizes and different company cultures, and it's really the large enterprise companies that are driving a lot of this like automation where the AI kind of does replace more of the tasks and more of the human component. But most of the, at least in the US, most of the companies are small to mid-size, and they have less HR resources doing a lot more work. And a lot of those people, they have so much on their plate that when you help augment or, you know, make some of their tasks more efficient, they see it as a positive, not as like, oh, you're replacing me, because now they have more free time to devote to all the other things that are on their plate. And that's a lot of like the smaller to mid-sized companies. I think it makes up 98% of the workforce in the US. I believe only 2% is large enterprise. So just a different perspective.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm glad to hear, you know, from Sid that this is going to be a balance, a fine balance where we're going to be. It's just like a supportive technology to just eliminate the bias, and nobody's getting replaced by technology, and that's great. So now let's move on to the Q&A session. Let's do it this way. I'd like to ask people to raise their hand and ask their question by unmuting, but there's also a lot of questions in the chat. So why don't we alternate these so we have a bit of variety? And the first question is for Shirin by Kritika. It says, your solution is very relevant, but I'd expect stickiness in adoption. You mentioned that HR is open to hear about it if it's a suggestive aid rather than black and white. But how open are firms to even having the conversation on performance review bias in their companies?
So because I'm a new entrepreneur and I have to be kind of smart with my time and who I target, I've identified that there are certain industries and certain types of companies that are more open and more progressive about solving this type of problem, and also that they show they're already investing money in like diversity, equity, and inclusion types of initiatives, or they're doing training already, or they're doing social media posts related to it, or they've hired a chief diversity officer or some other kind of diversity group within the company. All of those are signs that they're investing in it, that they care about it, that they have someone on their team that is knowledgeable about it. So when I go and talk to these companies, typically the person I'm talking to is already aware of the potential for bias to affect their performance reviews and the performance appraisal process. And sometimes when I'm telling them things, they're telling me, oh my God, that's a great study. Can you send me that? I want a copy of this. Or sometimes they're even adding to the conversation, teaching me things that I didn't know. But I will also add that the conversations for us, because, you know, it started as just solving the bias issue, but what I learned through the process of talking to all these leaders is that it's not just about bias. It's just people don't know how to rate other people in general. They don't know how to give constructive feedback that's meaningful and actionable. And so when you talk about things like using vague language, using subjective language, these have nothing to do with bias. It's just about the quality of the review. And that's something that HR people already have to spend a lot of time dealing with, where, you know, some of them I've spoken to, they'll read through a percentage of reviews that managers write, and they'll mark it up the same way this we sort of mark it up. They'll mark it up, and then they'll either have a talk with the manager about it, or they'll send it back to the manager to have them rewrite. And so what we've done is, over the last year, we've adjusted our product offering so that it's not just about bias anymore. It's about quality, and it's about how do you just make it a better quality review. So it makes the HR people even more open to trying something like this and having a conversation about it, because it's no longer just a diversity product. It's also an HR and diversity product. So if you talk about like what Jay and Sid are working on, these aren't just diversity problems. They're solving other core HR problems. So that's how you make it more attractive to even the less progressive ones.
Thanks a lot for that. And now I'd like to ask Rohan to unmute himself, and then you can ask the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcel. Thanks, Siddharth, Shireen, and Jay for insights. My question is, we were talking about bias. In the same frame, there are a lot of candidates who put a lot of buzzwords in their LinkedIn profiles or resumes. So is AI smart enough to filter the fake candidates from the real worthy ones?
Okay, I'll take a shot first. Thanks, Rohan, for that question. So we earlier also mentioned this, that most ATSs now are pivoting to not just keyword searches from the CV, but to NLP, natural language processing. So it's really it's getting smarter. Technology is getting smarter, not just look at those buzzwords or keywords that candidate mentioned on your LinkedIn or on your CV, but to understand a little bit more deeper about the kind of role that you have performed in the past, the potential that you have, the kind of skills that you have displayed, etc., etc. So I think there would be a time where systems, by and large, would get smarter and look beyond just the keywords and much more in a particular candidate's profile. And of course, this is the first step. We are talking about the first step, which is the pre-screening phase. That is not where you get hired, right? There is a pre-screening, and then most companies follow various other stages before you're evaluated and you're selected for that process. So there's only a little bit of what you could hack to do to get into the system. But after that, you're on your own, right? There's so many other things that you really need to get through. So not worth the trouble.
All right, thank you, Sid, for answering that, and thank you, Rohan, for asking the question. Another question comes from the chat. It's from Lily, and I think that's directed to Shirin, as it seems most relevant to your work. So how will AI help to resolve dispute between managers and employees in terms of performance review? So far, it helps more with written feedback, but how does it help in day-to-day interactions, including verbal, as feedback is an ongoing process, not only once a year during performance appraisal?
Yeah, so this ties back to my previous answer, where I'm targeting a lot of more progressive companies and HR departments. And when I say progressive, they've already shifted to doing what's called continuous feedback. So it's no longer just once a year or twice a year. They're doing it ongoing. It's up to the employees and the manager to decide how often. It could be once a week, more often, a little or less often. Every company does it differently. So the way that our MVP, the minimum viable product we developed, is done is so that we're asking people to keep track of their own work progress and achievements in our platform. And then with each progress update, so now it's easier to keep track of how you're doing as you're going through the year instead of at the end of the year. But with each progress update you write up, you can tag your collaborators and stakeholders, and then they also get the opportunity to give you real-time feedback on it, attached to that whatever work update or progress update you had. So the way that it's done is not just once a year. And while it can't necessarily right now help you in like verbal discussions, it is only for written discussions. A lot of people still do, most companies still do the written feedback. I mean, there's tons of companies I could mention, like one of them is Reflective. It's a performance review solution. It's for written feedbacks, continuous. And I think in the last like 6 years, they've raised $100 million. And they have tons and tons of small to mid-sized customers. I believe their last reported number was 500 big customers. So there's a market for that. So we can't solve everything. Eventually you could apply the NLP to conversations, but it's a more difficult user experience to build around right now. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. If it didn't, Lily can let us know, but I think that was a great answer. Now there's another question, I think for any one of you. What are the certain dilemmas of using AI? And have you encountered any challenging situations in your line of work? And can you share that? This is from Nadim.
I mean, I can share this one. Basically, this is an elaboration of what I mentioned earlier, which is a case where we managed to pull up some data to show that when, let's say, the hiring managers and the recruiters, when they claim that they're looking for certain traits in their candidates, when we look at the people who actually make it through the selection pipeline, you realize that that's not the case, right? Because a lot of biases tend to creep in, and one particular one that causes that is the video interview. So don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but essentially what happens is the candidate gets to record video responses to certain questions that the employer asks. So stuff like, tell me about yourself, why do you want to join us? And a lot of recruiters get very influenced by the video, which is, I guess, the performance of the person in this kind of context versus, CV or psychometric assessment result. So that becomes a tricky conversation to have, because then obviously we can see what's going on, but to try and encourage organization to realize that, you have allowed biases and things like that to creep in, how do you try and address for that? So to make the situation more complicated was the head of HR, then she starts to ask us, are my people actually qualified to do the assessment? Are they qualified to actually qualify the candidates? And I'm like, what? Yeah, so I think the good part about data is it helps to uncover all these things so that the right conversations can happen. But certainly tricky.
Yes, that sounds tricky, definitely. But thank you for sharing that. Another question is by Devrat, who's asking, how does AI deal with interpreting contexts where the use of aggressive or strong opinions is indeed warranted or justified? So for instance, it's a performance review of a brash or unprofessional employee.
Yeah, so that's why we ask for people to give specific examples. So if you're going to call somebody brash or unprofessional, you better have a good example. And there's a lot of there are some really good training sessions on how to give what they call like videotapable, stick to videotapable language when you're describing the example. So don't say how you feel or how it made other people feel maybe, but just say like, this is what happened. And so doing it this way kind of keeps the emotion out of it and makes it more factual. And what can happen is, we can look at that language, the AI or the natural language processing is analyzing that language, and we could flag it for HR to review manually so that it can be a person looking at it. But in terms of like interpreting like AI or natural language processing, NLP, interpreting context, there's a lot that NLP can do with looking at the context of how language is used. But there's also still a lot of research that needs to be done. And so, for example, like we've applied for NSF, which is in the US, it's a National Science Foundation. It's a grant to do that R&D to make more, to make NLP more nuanced for the use case that we're developing it for. But, NLP exists for a lot of different use cases, and they do look at the context. You don't want to, for example, if I said, if I described a product or something like, I'm trying to think of a good example. If I described, I don't know, like something was really fat, versus if I said a person was fat, the NLP could look at, the grammar structure of how you're using that word and what you're referring to when you said fat. And if you were describing a human being, then maybe it would flag it as something that you should consider changing. But if you were describing something else that maybe is not a human being, maybe it's more appropriate, then it won't give you that coaching moment. So NLP is nuanced in that way that it can look at context right now, but it still needs work for different use cases. Like you have to fine tune it.
That's really interesting. Thanks a lot for that. Another question comes from Frederick. So I think his question relates to transparency. And is it correct to assume that each individual, and for example, employees and the candidates, have access to those data and are able to comment on those? And he was also asking that this can be actually used also in case of conflicts with their employers.
Okay, I'll go for it. For us, we do show the candidates a fair amount of the results, actually. Obviously, not everything. So one thing we realized is, for example, a job applicant who goes through a pretty rigorous selection process, a lot of times they don't know what happens after that. They may not even hear back, right? So I think we want to address that. So what we do is not just tell candidates how the selection process is going in terms of stage, but also let us share more about yourself, right, to you, so that you can actually understand yourself more. Having, let's say, if you went through some psychometric assessments, so we can talk about their personalities, how that impacts them at work, blah, blah, blah. And even suggest areas for them to work on as development areas, suggest what could be their strengths that they could leverage. But we stop short of saying, okay, overall, we think that your fit is low, or things like that, because that will get really thorny for the employer. In the case of employees, I think similar, but in the case whereby you actually want to share the learning and development tips and content with the employee as well, because I think they need to own that, not just the manager. So when we say that, for example, you have a development area, these are some things you should be doing, I think we believe that should be very transparent with the employee. And then the role of the manager really is to provide that environment and maybe the structured plan for that to happen, right? So I think for us, we believe that the candidate or employee deserves to know a lot. But I guess for various reasons, we understand it cannot be 100% transparent.
All right, thank you for that. Perhaps there's another question related to the transparency and the right to know. It's from Frederick as well, the second question. So, we have all been there. It's quite annoying that the recruiters may not be responding to us, and the waiting is said to be the most difficult part of application. And so how do you address this? A lot of the times we ask for feedback, but maybe due to the sheer number of applicants, we are not able to get that feedback that we want. Maybe we want to avoid certain mistakes. We want to know why we have not been selected. But with AI now, it is possible because data is generated on every application. So do you think this could actually help the applicants to improve on their application process and to let them know, and should they know why they were not selected?
Yeah, I feel you, Frederick. This is something that has not changed over so many decades, right? We've all been a job seeker at some point in time, and we've applied to multiple companies. But the biggest pain point is not hearing back at all. It's like a black box. You send in your application, and you don't know what's happening. This is changing. Things are changing, and we are also doing a lot to change this at Zopa. So we provide a complete transparency to the candidate in terms of a dashboard. So you can see all your applications to different companies in a single dashboard. And by way of robotic process automation, there is always a feedback loop back to the applicant to give them a feedback as to where they stand in the entire selection process. Now, that is at least a starter, because at least a candidate knows where they stand in the application process and if they've been selected or not selected. That's the first level. The second level, of course, is getting feedback as to why they were not selected. Now, I think that's quite difficult because of the sheer numbers at the moment. So it's better not to give feedback to say very vague statements, because if you're not going to be specific about that particular applicant, then it doesn't sound that good. But I think the starting point is providing some kind of feedback. So it's not a black box, but you're kept in the loop about where your application stands. I think that's the starter. Of course, the wish is that you also start receiving personalized feedback on your application to each and every application, which at the moment is a little far-fetched. But for starters, we need to have a closure loop, which we are doing.
Can I add on to that? Actually, it's a little personal story. So many years ago when I was interviewing with BCG, I had this very interesting experience. So it's actually a 6-round interview process, right? And what was really cool is after every interview, somebody calls me to tell me how I should do better for the next one. So they would say, there are some things that you did well and some things not so good. So if you could work on these, I think it will help you to progress to the next interview. So I was blown away because like never have I experienced something like this. But I think it also reflects how the employer is really trying to understand you for what you are versus what you perform in an interview. And it's something that I learned to try and do at Pulsifi as well, whenever we interact with our candidates and our employees. And, you know, like Sid said, if we could actually imbue this into a platform that is more scalable, I think that would be really awesome.
That's a really great story. I think a lot of us wish that that was the application, that was the process we have gone through. Unfortunately, the reality is a bit different because not many companies have the bandwidth of BCG to kind of, you know, respond to every candidate and help them out. I wanted to ask you, Jay, you mentioned that there's this new technology. Actually, I don't know how new it is, that we can, instead of live interviews, we can record the answers. You know, a lot of the information about the candidate can be learned from nonverbal clues, basically facial expressions, you know, like the way that you can tell if they're tired, if they're happy, sad. So is AI going also in this way, except from analyzing the language? Does it also analyze, could it analyze facial expressions to kind of learn more about the candidate?
I'd say it's yes. So the technology to record videos has been around probably 10 years, I think, for candidates to do that. And the technology to analyze the videos for certain things about a person, probably a couple of years old. And I think the industry generally has various expertise already. So I wouldn't say that there are specific companies that are really awesome at it, right? But I think the long and short is that, number one, the algorithm is not great all the time at picking out those signals. And number two, not all of these signals matter for the job, right? So for an employer to use these things, I think we really have to be careful, right? So back to number one, there are various, okay, so the algorithm basically transcribes what a person is saying, and it looks for, let's say, changes in pitch and all that. But you realize that, for example, even in Southeast Asia, to get transcription right is not easy because people speak very differently and, you know, all over the world. And I guess a lot of the times the algorithms that are trained, let's say with American English or British English, they work differently over here. And the next one is also, let's say, the image, right? Looking at how facial expressions, verbal cues, the body moving, is the person blinking too much, is the person looking at the camera? All these signals can be picked out and it's factual because if I blinked, I blinked, right? But does it matter for the job? Because maybe if this person needs to face the client, then there's a certain kind of disposition that you want. Okay, maybe that's explainable. But if the person does not, then maybe it doesn't matter at all, right? So I think it's really number one and two, which is threading expectations of what the algorithm can do. And number two, then which one of those actually matter for the job? So like for us, when we deploy things like this, technologies can do it, but I think we need to use it carefully and for the right reasons.
Maybe Sharon, can you share with us? A lot of the performance reviews, you know, it's also verbal, right? And as the question suggested, that a lot of the conversations are happening all year round. And certainly I have been in situations when maybe the language itself, if you looked at the script, would not be deemed aggressive or somewhat unreasonable, but the way it was conveyed was quite it didn't rub me the wrong way. You know, it was a bit odd. So, you know, how can technology help with these kind of things? You know, kind of like the tone and the kind of facial expressions. Like, is this something that you can actually capture and improve upon?
I think that it's possible, but we're not going in that direction. It's very, very difficult. and it's even more risky than just looking at the words that are typed. So.
All right, thanks. A lot of your software gets you the diversity. Yes, I agree that gets you the diversity, but that's not end all, right? I mean, I think that to go beyond diversity, we need inclusion, and you really need to know how to work with the diversity. Actually, if you don't know how to work with it, it can really go wrong. It can really go south, and it can really just be more detrimental than just hiring people you know how to work with. So how do you go a step beyond? Okay, so now we have diversity, but how do you, I think Shirin's software is touching upon that, but how about Sid and Jay, like how do you ensure that once you hire the person and okay, now you have the diversity, now you can actually harness the power of the diversity that you have?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Didn't fully get it.
Okay, so you hired a diversity, but now how do you make sure that the diversity is actually included in the company, that actually people work with it and they're actually getting the most potential out of the diversity? I mean, because that's tricky, right? I mean, hiring diversity, supposedly, with your software, that's addressed, but the tricky part is then what do you do with the diversity? How do you take it? How do you really integrate it? And how do you make the use of it that you have? It's not just having the people of diverse backgrounds around the table, it's how you interact with each other. So how do you think this can be improved upon?
Marcel, if I can take a step first to this one. It's more about the workforce analytics, meaning post-hire, how do you track performance? How do you track various data points? And a lot of data points are collected. You know, the employment engagement surveys, the employee engagement surveys, the appraisal reports, the performance reports, the quarterly, the half yearly, the annual appraisals, 360-degree feedbacks, peer-to-peer feedbacks, all of these all of these different data points are definitely collected by any company. So there is data, and that's where workforce analytics comes into play. That's where Zopa also analyzes all of these data points to determine each individual performances. That's where you identify star performers. That's where you identify people with potential but not able to perform. All of those kind of metrics, right? So there is a way to do it with data, but of course you need to have data as an underlying requirement before you can develop any of these models to predict. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you go ahead, Jay.
Sorry. Yeah. So diversity, I think, has been shown to help with innovation, right? Because it leads to better ideas, more perspectives. And I think the right way to really use that is to look beyond the role. Like, I think traditionally a lot of the view has been, does this person fit the role well? But I think there are other perspectives to that, other lenses, which is, does this person fit the team well? And does this person fit well with the leader? And also, does this person fit with the organization as a culture? So there we can actually look at how the interaction between different people would be. And actually that's where diversity then matters, because if you put a so-called person who is more unusual together with more people who are unusual, then actually you don't really help, because you want to put the unusual person with the usual people, right? So I think that's the kind of lens to look beyond that role, but also into various perspectives. But to get there, we do need the organization to embrace more of this whole spirit of analytics and getting that data, people data on the platform, so that it's easier to look at all these different kind of mixes. Honestly, I think very few organizations are there, but I think many of them want to get there.
I was going to add something about that. It's not, I mean, so the analytics helps you identify the opportunities, but then you also have to take other actions and other steps. And a lot of that, I mean, there's going to need to be some training to teach teams how to, listen to other voices, how to, for example, if somebody's really shy on a team and every time they're in a meeting, they can't really speak up. Well, I mean, you got to be more inclusive about how you allow people to share ideas. So maybe they're not comfortable in the meeting, but there's another way for them to share it. So it's just about training people about inclusion and about different methods for whether it be like gender, race, or even like cognitive differences to be more inclusive and to unlock the powers of the diversity.
Thank you, Sharon. That's really encouraging. And that actually ties it all back up and say that, yes, there's technology, but the human touch and the human learning cannot be replaced. And there still needs to be empathy and inclusion and knowledge and wisdom to achieve really the inclusion, even though technology can help with that. So thank you so much. I think we just ran out of time, just 11:13 Singapore now. So I'd like to everybody to join me in giving a round of applause for our three incredible speakers today. So virtual applause, thank you so much. This has been incredibly interesting, timely, and insightful discussion, and thank you all for the questions. And we will certainly continue these conversations, and we will find future avenues how to continue these debates. So please connect with us. And before we go, as has been customary at Zoom in these meetings, could we please take a group photo? So if everybody could please, if you're comfortable, can you please switch on your cameras so that I'll just click the photo. We don't have a shutter, so I'll tell you when I do the photo. Okay, if everybody can get ready, that would be great. Right. All right, so I'll click it in at the count of 3. 1, 2, and 3, smile. All right, that's brilliant. All right, so thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to close today's online session, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you at our future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day, guys. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yes,
thank you, Sid. Thank you, Sharon.
Bye.
Thanks, Marcel. Thanks, anyways, everyone.
Thank you, Jay. Bye-bye.
You guys.
Bye.